I guess it's good noon. It's a minute after. We can say good afternoon. I'm Kevin McPherson. This is HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We've just got an update. We had a segment last night, and I brought the information that Jerron Pierre Jr., Jacksonville State guard, veteran guard, 6'5" guy, was down to 4. And this is reporting again from David Sisk that covers Kentucky basketball. But it was forwarded to me last night, and I was able to jump out there with that. I've since talked with Jerron Pierre Jr. this morning. But down to 4, Arkansas, Auburn, Ole Miss, SMU, with a decision expected on Monday. So the recruiting dead period, the week-longer recruiting dead period ended. You just need to know if UN's visit this weekend. Hold on, I need to know that too. But with the dead period ending yesterday, now visits are on. I have reported you guys. I have source information that Arkansas is going to have as many up to 4 visitors over the next 2 weeks, which means 3 weekends with, midweek stuff twice in between, 14, 15-day period. They could have as many as 4 visitors. One of them potentially, I guess, is Jerron Pierre Jr. Again, 6'5" out of Jacksonville State. He's also declared for the NBA draft. I spoke with him this morning on the phone. The reporting I gave was not only the final, what the 4 schools were yesterday, when the decision date was, but he also has a workout with the Washington Wizards set up for, I think, May 9th. So that's a ways out there. But that's where we started last night, and we're picking up with this conversation with Jerron Pierre Jr. Now, this is the second time I've been on the phone with him. A few days ago, when I spoke with him, it was all about acknowledging, and we were the first to break this, put it out on one of these segments, but also tweeted it, that Arkansas had been in touch with his agent, that he'd personally spoken with coaches at Kentucky and Ole Miss. Well, Ole Miss is one of the teams in this Final Four. But when I talked to him today, I needed more information. I'm like, hey, man, I see you're down to 4. He acknowledged that the list is correct. So the reporting, now I've got it confirmed on my end with him, with the player himself, and that the decision date for Monday is what he plans to do. All right, so things can change in recruiting, but from the horse's mouth, those things are true. Next question. Look, I know you have visited SMU. What about the other 3 schools, Auburn, Ole Miss, and Arkansas? And the answers for each one of those was not yet. So we've got visit information now. He said not yet. I'm going to talk about a lot more stuff to get around this when we kind of try to figure out what's going on here. Next natural question is, well, you're making a decision between 4 schools. Have you Zoomed with all of these teams? No, haven't Zoomed with them. That's interesting. He was on campus at SMU. He's talked to coaches at Ole Miss. Maybe he didn't Zoom with them, but that was his answer, that he hasn't done Zooms with them. And so Arkansas's process is not the same as everybody else so far under John Calipari. We know that he has had players come on campus before they can publicly commit. Some other schools will take commitments off Zooms or however they want to do it. So it's not that every one of these requires a visit in person to take a commitment or whatever. But I'm just trying to give you a little bit about this conversation and what he's telling me. And I said, so do you have plans then to visit any of these schools, except for obviously SMU where he's been already? And he told me he wasn't sure yet if he would. Okay. That's interesting, right? So he's not sure yet if he will. And so when I talked to him about some other stuff, and I'm going to share a little bit more with you, I circled back to that. I'm like, so you're going to make an announcement, but you haven't visited 3 of these, but you could you commit to one that you haven't visited yet? And at that point, he kind of shut it down and goes, well, I don't know, but you really need to talk to my agent about this, or the person representing him. And so he then kind of shut it down in terms of, but he'd already told me, he'd already given me answers on that, but it's my job to push a little bit more and see how I can, kind of figure out where that could potentially go. So that's that part of it. So I asked him, what connections with this roster, with this past team, with Calipari, what do you have here? And he's, I asked him about Nellie Davis, and he told me that he and Nellie are tight, which is very interesting because we've been talking about, well, what about guys that came on under the color of night, cloaked on their visit? Well, that's what Nellie Davis did last year. He was the one guy that we didn't learn about until after the fact, and his commitment went public, that they had actually gotten him in. He and Nelly are tight. Could Nelly be giving him the roadmap and the blueprint for how to visit without people knowing? If he's on that tip, he's not going to tell me that he's coming to visit this weekend or that he has already. It doesn't make him a liar. Think about it. When Nelly came and they kept that under wraps, somebody was asking him, "Where'd you go this weekend? I didn't see you here." He might have had questions. And people that, may not be in his tight group, he might have told them, "No, I wasn't visiting anywhere." That's not a lie. That's protecting your process and your investment, because both sides have investments. It's not just the NIL investment that the school's making. The players have investments in what's best for them. And they're investing their time and their trust in people. And they're, trying to figure out what kind of role am I going to have in concert with the NIL part. All of that's going to matter, And so with a player like Jerron Pierre Jr., I understand his answers and why they gave him. It may be they sound candid to me. But at the same time, would it surprise me if he had already been on campus before the dead period? Maybe not. It wouldn't surprise me if he's, when I was talking to him on the phone this morning, he might have been in the airport, getting ready to come into NWXNA in Northwest Arkansas for his visit or somewhere else, So who knows? But the Nelly part of it is intriguing to me because what I always talked about when we started with Lamar Wilkerson, and that was hot. And we know kind of where that's been going. And then I broke the news that Arkansas had been in touch and made contact with the agent for Jerron Pierre Jr. a few days ago. So he told me that. So he was in that picture of that 6'5" guard, both out of Conference USA, both first-team All-League, both snipers from three, both volume scorers, both would be great additions. And we were talking about Nelly when we were talking about Lamar. Well, the same principle applies here. You've got a veteran, volume production guy who you brought in from the mid-major level last year to play the two, maybe help at the three if needed. That could, be a three-point shooter as well. And now he's leaving. He can't come back. So naturally, you would be looking at guys like that to replace him. Then the DJ Wagner and the roster numbers and the thought that, well, if DJ stays, you probably can't add another guard. Where are the minutes going to be? We've talked more about that lately. And then I've been torn between that and, well, you really need someone that could play that two guard and give you not only some production, scoring, shot creator, but especially from three. Well, Pierre checks those boxes. And he's tight with Nelly. I wonder what, I asked him a follow-up on what Nelly said about him in Arkansas, and that was, I didn't really get any feedback on that. I think he got interrupted with something. That's when I circled back to asking about visits again, and then it was down to talk to the agent. All right, 8 minutes in early. HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. So Pierre, just running through the numbers, 21.6 points, 5.5 rebounds, 3.7 or 8 assists, puts up really good numbers. When you look at it production-wise, 7.63 attempts per game, so well over 100 makes to get to 38.2%, 81% free throw shooter. So when you look at him, it's very comparable statistically to Wilkerson. Pierre can be a combo, play 1 and 2. He's probably more of a creator off the bounce and off, on the ball more than maybe how Wilkerson gets it done. There may be more versatility 1 through 3 there with him. So this guy would be a great addition. I think what's interesting is I know that he's been on that visit to SMU, and I know that Ole Miss has been on him for a while, and I've got a source that tells me Ole Miss has really levied a bag to try to get this guy. Auburn, up until this, Saturday when they lost in the Final Four, been busy. And they've been on a lot of players that Arkansas is on, whether it's frontline or backcourt players, but they've made the Final Four here. So is Bruce Pearl making a play to replace so many of those, high-level backcourt guys that, they surrounded Janai Broome and Dylan Cardwell with? This would be the kind of guy that could do that. He's that kind of guy that fits what Bruce Pearl does. He likes those alpha types to plug in. Who doesn't? There's more than one way to do it, but here's a guy that's got some decisions to make. If it's true that he hasn't visited these other places other than SMU, like he told me, saying I'm not sure yet, that's a smart answer. I mean, he may very well be sure what he's doing this weekend. He's visiting somewhere, or maybe he shut it down and already knows. There's always the possibility that Arkansas at some point peeled off and he's just left them on the list because they showed attention. He wanted that on there. I mentioned that yesterday. That's always a possibility. But it very well could be that Arkansas is in hot pursuit here. It could help explain. I've also heard the NIL asking price out of the gates for this guy was pretty high. But if your high dollar NIL push to keep Adu Thero, he's gone to the draft. And if if it's true that maybe, we'll see what happens there. But you got a lot of NIL money on that offer. I know that for a fact for both Thero. I mean, that stuff is around $5 million combined for those guys. I'll tell you that much. So you got plenty to work with there. How much do you want to throw at this guy? How much there? Now I'm going to talk about other potential visits and some of the other stuff we've been talking about. And then I'm going to come back and talk retention and how a roster would look like if you were more of a small ball kind of a roster, and how that maybe could be justified, how that might be justified. Why is his name even being mentioned? Someone's going through because he's got Arkansas on his Final Four list. Just because he's telling me he's not sure that he's going to visit Arkansas with a decision coming Monday, I just explained how that could, maybe he has already visited. Maybe he will visit this weekend. Maybe he gets to Monday and decides to push it out even more. Earthman just lost his point guard. Yeah, I'm not sure what that means. So again, if you're having as many as 4 visitors in the next couple of weeks, maybe this is one of them. 3-point shooting nonsense needs to stop. Well, all you have to do, just plugging in some stats is look at the Final Four and Elite 8 teams. Just about all of those teams shot 35% or better. There were, Tennessee was at 34%. They may be another outlier. Arkansas was some good decisions at the end of the game of playing itself into an Elite 8, in which case it would have been an outlier in the Elite 8 for a team sub 35%. It is, better to have be a little bit better there than Arkansas was this year. We always identified that as an issue. So I don't think it's BS in terms of you don't need it. I think it would behoove Arkansas to try to improve there. But that doesn't mean that they will, and it doesn't mean that you still can't have a great year and maybe buck the odds and be one of those teams that's below 35% that gets to a Final Four. So you can't rule that out either. All right, moving on. We've been talking a lot about especially yesterday with the news that Malik Ewan put out a Final 5 list. I explained, look, anytime you've got paperwork done, and it's beyond the financial aid agreement. Those things we've over the years have shown with portal guys, they could sign a bunch of those, and it's where they enroll. Arkansas's done the back end stuff at the University of Arkansas that you have to do through enrollment and all that stuff. So all that's done. That stuff doesn't happen unless there's been some indication I'm coming to school there. But other schools are reaching out until the visit and public part. You don't feel, you understand that something can change there with other teams. And even then, I gave a proof of concept of guys, even in Arkansas, that publicly it went public. They were coming, and that didn't work. That was Isaiah Moss a few years ago under Eric Patrick Musselman out of Iowa, and then Kansas swooped in and got him. It's, no surprise that Kansas is on Ewan's 5 potential visit list. That could be a list, as I said yesterday, that is just now getting out because he wants it out, and he very well may be in line to get a weekend visit this weekend with Arkansas. It could be as soon as this weekend, and get his public commitment announcement done with Arkansas. It's not uncommon for players to do that. We see lists all the time come out, and then the same day or the next day they make a commitment. You're like, well, that didn't last very long. It's because they already knew where they're going. You don't know how this stuff's going to overlap or really be. Ament wants 30 minutes a game. Well, I mean, that's not unreasonable. It may not be what, some programs are willing to do. I know Calipari's not going to overpromise something. I don't know if that's true or not. I was just reading a comment just to give, some insight, a little bit of insight on how a coaching staff might view that. They may want a guy, bring him in and say, yeah, that's what we have in the plan. Or they could say, look, we have a track record of bringing other high-level guys in while you're here and playing them 25 to 28 minutes. And we'll show you how by doing that, it gets you used to playing with other high level guys, which is what you're going to be doing at the NBA, and it helps your process and your progress and your development for the next level. And it's okay not to play third. There's more than one way to do that. Calipari can sell anything because he's had success with all of it at a higher level than anybody else. So for the Nate Ament comment, there's that. But going back to Malik Ewan, the 6'11", forward center out of Florida State, again, is his list of 5 finalists that includes Arkansas really something that's up to date in terms of I'm still considering that, or he just wanted the list out there and he's going to make an announcement soon? Was it Keyshawn Hall that put a list out and then made his commitment an hour or two later or the same day? And that's just one example. We've seen a lot of that during portal season. Not everybody does it that way, but some do. Nick Pringle, it's been real quiet. His stuff's processed and done for Arkansas. Maybe he's not going to put a list out, has no need to do that. And then he visits, or maybe he has visited, and we get a public announcement on that one soon too. It could be that Arkansas is in great shape still with both of those guys in terms of it's on the path to becoming public. Until it's done and it does get to that point, these other teams are going to be trying to get them. And even some will still do that if they go public. So just always keep that in mind. There are other big men. We talked about Eddie Lampkin, had Arkansas on his list. I mentioned yesterday, is that list a little bit old? It came out yesterday, but did Arkansas contact him last weekend when he got in the portal on the 5th? When that was the time frame, we went through it last night when smoke was starting to build steam for both Ewan and Pringle. Friday for Ewan, Sunday for Pringle, and Lampkin goes in the portal on Saturday. Was that an initial contact to cover base, working out the other stuff? Is that somebody that you might seriously look at? And if one of the other guys starts to flirt somewhere else, it gives you an out because maybe you'd rather get him anyway. There's so many ways this could play. So just keep an eye on this stuff. I won't rule out an Eddie Lampkin visit. We're talking about Jerron Pierre Jr. potentially visiting. Where could he visit this weekend? Because he's told me he hasn't visited the other places unless he really has and keeping it quiet. But if not him, if you're looking at the backcourt, a guy like Ian Jackson, a lot of folks think it's just a done deal with St. John's, and he's visiting there Sunday and Monday. And there may be a reason for those days for him that makes sense, but it also could be maybe he's going to go somewhere else. Maybe St. John's is just fine with visits being announced publicly. It seems like they are because we've heard a lot, not just his. Dylan Mitchell's another one, a guy we talked about last night as a potential at the 4 spot, with Arkansas having a need there as well with Adu Thero going in the portal, till they declaring for the draft. So you've got, multiple ways when you start looking at visits, but a Sunday, Monday visit leaves the door open that maybe an Ian Jackson could visit Arkansas or some other school Friday and Saturday. So we're trying to track all this because Arkansas can't comment on anything on recruits, and they wouldn't. But the other part of it is, they don't want it leaking out when guys are coming to visit. It's different with high school players. And the other thing is when it was last year and it was guys that Cal was bringing with him from Kentucky, or guys he was bringing with him that had signed with him with Kentucky, a lot of that stuff did get out, but I don't think that was a problem. I think he already knew that he was trying to keep those guys and probably already had his agreement set up with them. And the campus part was just to get them here and make sure before the commitment went public, but maybe he didn't have as much of a problem with some of those visits leaking out. But the true portal players that didn't play for him, guys like Nelly Davis, Jonas Adu, Brandon Garrison, those things didn't they were trying to keep tight wraps on most of that. And eventually some of that did get out the last minute, but just trying to explain it. And Calipari could always change his process. I mean, the one international player that Arkansas's got didn't visit. Well, he's overseas right now. It's understandable. He's not in the portal, so that's something that bucks that trend a little bit. He's already committed. A guy like Alvaro Forgeras, who I saw today, Kentucky is now, it sounds like they're out on him. Out of Robert Morris, out of Spain. He's back in Europe. He's in Spain right now. 6'8" forward, 14.1 points, 9.1 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 1.2 blocks, 1.4 steals, 54% field goal shooter, 41.3% from three on 4 attempts per game, 78.4% from the foul line. This dude would be awesome to help add to your front line. But he's a guy that's, aside from NIL, is probably going to expect a lead kind of a role. And I envision Trevor Brazil for that. So I'm not saying you couldn't make it work or but I'm just throwing out kind of some of my initial thoughts on that. Could Arkansas be in play there? I've been working on trying to get some answers on that for days. It's tough when a guy's overseas. But so I'm not bringing his name up as a potential to visit, just as the visits are important for sure, but there may be a path, and I'm showing you examples of how maybe you could still be in on a guy that won't visit. So I want to always try to cover, some exceptions to the rule maybe. Keyshawn Murphy, Chance is another name we've talked about. I don't know. I really don't. All right, so I'm 21 minutes in. I am going to keep it tighter today. Jameer Watkins is another name we talked about out of Florida State. A guy that could be your 3-4 guy. Could Arkansas make a play for him? He's been on campus before. That won't count for Calipari unless there's some good reason to get that done. I can't imagine it, because being on campus is part of that is not just your familiarity with the campus in Arkansas, because he's got a little bit of that. It's about the meetings and his process and it's taking ownership in his process. So barring something unusual for someone who's not overseas, it's hard for me to imagine Arkansas, just based on a Zoom call under Calipari, letting a commitment go public until they've been on campus. But Watkins is maybe another 6'1" forward, combo forward, 3-4 guy. We've gone through his stats. Most of you know who that is. That would be another guy to maybe watch for a visit. And again, hopefully some of this stuff breaks and someone reports it, or someone sees them in the airport and gets a photo and puts it out, or, you're always, I'm in the 501, I don't have the minions to spread around at the different spots that these guys might show up at for dinner or lunch or whatever. If I was in Fayetteville, I'd be on this, and I would be. I'd be staking out the airport doing this from the airport, from X and A. So, but there's other possibilities. I just went through some names. There could be someone else that's off our radar right now. Maybe names we've mentioned but haven't been heavy on the radar. Keyshawn Murphy. Someone just said that. Can't rule that out. There's one. Maybe another backcourt guy. Some of those guys. Or I talked about Rodney Rice. I don't know what that means. I trust Kevin over somebody. I don't know what that means. Well, is that in reference to something specific on a player that's coming out today, or just in general? I don't know even who that is. I didn't see the last part of that. That doesn't really matter. We have to do that because I don't want to. So let's quickly. I wanted to talk retention. I gave percentages the other night, 75 to 85%. I'm going to stick with that range. Who's John Graber? I don't know who that is. I don't know who John Graber is. I think I'm reading that right. So I gave some high percentages for guys like Carter Knox, Billy Richmond III, and Trevor Brazil. I'm still there. I may feel better about it, but I'm not going to give you a percentage again today. I just feel like those are the most likely. DJ, I'm feeling more. Maybe he comes back, especially the last time we were on. I talked about how I went from 51-49 to 50-50, but the source that had broke with me last year broke the information, and we put it out here during his visit. He committed to Cal, and it came out 2 weeks or maybe more it took to become public. There are complications there, but he felt like some of those same things will make it hard for him to leave and not just stick with Cal like he did effectively. Technically, he was a portal guy, but he was sticking with Cal. So maybe it's the same thing there. Maybe that happens. I'm leaving the number at 50-50 because I don't know that in 15 minutes I won't word play on Neighbors. Well, Mike Neighbors, is he giving out source info? He's no longer even the women's coach. I don't know. All right, so retention matters. DJ Wagner coming back. I've been talking about how would the minutes work. Let's go back to Pierre. which I said I'd circle back when we talked about some of this retention and small ball roles, small ball roster and roles. Or let's say it's Ian Jackson or some other guard. I mentioned Cedric Coward last night, the Washington State big guard. Went through all his numbers. Maybe there's someone you kick the tires on. Maybe there's somewhere that can go. There's other ones. But let's just say the idea that you're really crowded in the backcourt. Well, let's go through that again. Okay, so if you're going from 9 to 11, and I'm assuming guys like Isaiah Seeley, who would provide depth in a pinch, 1 through 3. Okay, the Springdale native, be a top 75 4-star guy out of high school last year, already signed and committed and signed in November. Then Kareem Artal, 6'8", 6'9", I'll call him a 3-4. Maybe a guy that you could count as a frontline piece and help you at the 4. But I've said those are back end rotation pieces. That 10 and 11 guy, if you're going, and that you'll still have a top 9 that plays the bulk of it and really is your day, your game in, game out rotation, except for what did we see? When Arkansas got down to a 7 rotation because of injuries, and some guys were ill some nights, it was, even before both Thero and Boogie were injured, there were times when after Boogie was out and Thero was still playing that either he was sick or something else was going on, and you were still down to maybe 7. There were times because of foul trouble you were down to really only 6 you could use for a long stretch, trying to buy time until you could get that guy in foul trouble, maybe back on the court and get you back to. So the other guys Arkansas had brought in on the roster were never playable. You could tell they were effectively walk-on. Calipari was not going to use them. I mean, we might have seen Jalen Carrollette would check in for the final 8 seconds of a half when someone was in foul trouble and you didn't want to bring them back in or something like that. But really, that doesn't count. So it makes sense for guys like Seeley and Artal. And maybe there's to me, these are guys that he would maybe be able to use for 8 or 10 minutes, something like that. Maybe not going to factor into the game-to-game rotation. But let's explore that a little bit. What if that's true about one of those guys, but an older guy like Artal, who's 20 years old, he maybe says, okay, it's not going to just be in an injury situation or a foul trouble situation. I'm going to find 8 to 10 minutes a game for him. He's going to have a role on this. And in a sense, if that's true, you kind of have a 10 deep typical rotation, still heavily favoring 9, but maybe a guy that is just going to be a guy like that. Well, that would allow you then, if you did that in combination with saying, okay, Carter Knox is not a Duke Thero, but what were the similarities? There were some similarities in the bully ball part of it. Carter Knox was probably Arkansas's second best bully ball player, crashing down from the wing. He learned how to use that frame. He learned how to get to the basket. Remember the Georgia game, the comeback? Both of those guys went nuts on the offensive glass. And then Carter Knox, what did he do? Is he consistently got better. He was learning how to draw free throw fouls and free throw attempts. Not at the level of Thero, but it was some games it was better. So those weren't just outliers. He had several of those. It wasn't as consistent as Thero, but here's a freshman, relative and compared to a guy that's a third-year college player. So maybe there's a small ball version of him helping at the 4 in terms of playing. If you're loaded in the backcourt, if you bring in a guy like Pierre and you kept DJ Wagner, maybe some combination of Artal and Carter when Trevin's not on the floor at the 4, or it allows you to play a true small ball lineup and shift Trevin over to the 5 for a little bit. You still need 2 big men. It looks like I still think it's Ewan and Pringle likely. But if I get to a point where I don't even feel like one or both of those are likely, I'll say that. We'll feel better when it gets to the finish line. Remember, the paperwork's done. I like to say that. But there are some possibilities where you could say, okay, you're keeping DJ, you bring a guy like Pierre in. Now you're really not, maybe you're not forcing DJ into too many two guard situations. Maybe it's he and Acuff figuring out a way you balance that with their minutes, and Pierre and Malik Thomas. But I can tell you this, Pierre, because of the 3-point shooting prowess, it would make a lot of sense that if you were trying to make that work, maybe it does. Maybe that would work. Again, you have 2 big men. You'd have Brazil, and so you'd still be like you were last year in a sense, where you had three bigs. It was Jonas Adu, Big Z, and Trevor Brazil. You'd stick with that formula, and instead of having Adu Thero, you'd have a combo of Artal and Carter supplementing some of those minutes, but you'd have Brazil instead of the backup to Thero as your main guy in that spot. So from that standpoint, you could make that work. You could maybe find a way to make that work. I'm not crazy about that either. I would like to get a guy like a Jameer Watkins or someone else, but you know, and it also makes sense to make sure that Carter's getting his minutes, both at the three and when he's on the floor with three other backcourt players, and he's kind of a small ball four. You make sure he's got his getting minutes, and he's a guy that to me has all league potential. So you're not going to shortchange him, and that's part of your retaining him. It's not just about the money, but his role. So you could maybe make that work. And Pierre is not small. He's 6'5", 6'4", 6'5". So there's a path for that. All right, I'm 31 minutes in. I'm going to cut it short. I'm not going to go an hour today. I've given as much as I can for now. We'll keep an eye on all of this. I hope something breaks on guys visiting. Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to show you a path where a Pierre could be in play, even if you keep DJ, and they've got it worked out, and they've got a game plan, and they've got everybody on board with that, and maybe Pierre has visited or will visit, or it could be that Arkansas is just still on his list. He didn't remove him, and he's not going to visit. Pierre and Wilkerson probably to UK. I mean, the only thing you could say about that is that Caden Lewis did decommit yesterday from Kentucky, and is there some path to, because at one point SMU and Kentucky were both pursuing both Pierre and Wilkerson, because Pierre can play on the ball as a one, and you can make that work, and then use them in tandem as 2 and 3 with another. I mean, there's ways to make something like that work. So I couldn't possibly rule out anything in this, how this stuff just shifts so quickly, because not only the NIL money, but teams' needs change based on who they thought they had today. And a Caden Lewis, again, that sounds like a surprise. He gets in the portal, and Kentucky's not going to stand pat. They're going to be answering these things. So you just never know. But yeah, we're keeping it. This is visit watch now. Thank goodness that week-long dead period, it felt like a year, is over. And up to 4 visitors in the next 2 weeks, spanning 3 weekends, sounds great. And at the end of the day, just remember, Arkansas probably, is going to get only 3 players out of the portal, maybe 4. But to me, if you go 4, that meant that DJ left or somebody else left that you were trying to retain. 3 is probably, and then I'm counting that 3 includes 2 big men, and right now I'm still in the place where I believe it's still Ewan and Pringle. I'm not at a point, because a 5 list came out, Arkansas reached out to Lampkin, that I think, that something's wrong here. It could be that. It could be that there's a shift, or it could just be the timing. Remember, one of my favorite documentaries is The Fog of War. Going back to the Kennedy presidency, and the strife and the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the U.S., and the Cuba crisis and all that, and how we almost went to nuclear war. But the Fog of War talks about in every era of war, in every nation, and it goes on now. Some of the information, some of the intel, or whatever's coming through, sometimes is timed wrong. It's not up to date. It's not quite accurate for this reason. It didn't paint the full picture. And then decisions are made based on not enough intelligence, right? Or it's not that it's bad, it's just not enough. Or it's old. It's not as, relevant in the moment. Or maybe they misread just by, how they communicate what we think a meaning of a word is, or a phrase, and what another country means when there's all kinds of things that go into that. I'm not, that may sound like a strained metaphor or analogy, some of that, but the point is, there is a fog of war. This is warfare. This is recruiting. It's its own sport. John Calipari's best at it. That's why when all the fog settles, it's going to be okay. He's going to get great players on the front line, really good players, and they're going to figure out whether it's a 3-4 guy or a guard or both because maybe someone else left, it's all going to be fine. They're going to get quality guys. And I keep looking at retention. If I feel good about the guys like Trevor Brazil and Carter Knox and Billy Richmond III, and I feel really good about Darius Acup Jr. and Malik Thomas like I do, those are 5 right there. And even if you go to 11, remember 2 of those are probably not your typical rotation pieces. They're just there so that you're not stuck like you were last year, probably. Maybe with one of those having maybe a little more defined role, but still not in the top 9. So if you still have a top 9 that's going to get the bulk of your stuff, you got 5 that I feel really good about right now. So it's not all about how much are we missing in the portal. How many of those teams in the portal that are gathering things aren't as well off with retention as Arkansas looks to be right now. So you see what I'm saying? It's not all bad just because there's not a name that's come off the board yet. And I don't know for a fact. I'm not at 100% on Trevin or Billy or Carter, but I feel pretty strong about it. So we'll see. I mean, that could change too. Remember, NIL and promises and all these things are going to impact some of that stuff. I always promise to leave and then I don't. Well, I hope we got enough in today with this part of it. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Kevin McPherson, if something breaks, I'm jumping right back on here. We got a long day. We're in the trenches. We're going to try to find out more visit stuff. And instead of just tagging a comment to this segment, if there's anything I get on visits, I'm jumping right back on. I'm not going to just put a written comment or a tweet out. I may do that too, but I'm going to come back on here and we're going to talk. Kevin is Boss Hog. I remember Boss Hog, man. That was one of my favorite shows growing up. Dukes of Hazzard? Is that a Dukes of Hazzard reference? You remember the lineup on CBS on Friday nights? I think I do. Was it Dukes at 7 and Dallas at 8, and then there was another one, and I can't remember. Was it Knots Landing or something? I don't know, but I know it was Dukes of Hazzard, Dallas, and then something. Knight Rider. Always appreciate you. Thank you, Zay. Yeah, I mean, those were the gravy days, man. I didn't have anything to worry about. I had I was a kid. But I loved it, man. I love watching Dallas. There was no greater villain ever in television or movies or anything. I don't care who you are or what you think, than J.R. Ewing. And if you don't, if you're not familiar with it, if you're younger, go check some of that stuff out. I don't know if you can find that on one of these cable networks or something where you can watch those shows, but I loved them. Yeah, I'm really signing off now. Falcon Crest. What did I say? Knots Landing, Falcon Crest. Yeah, it might have been that. I remember that now. Who was it that was on Falcon Crest? The dude that was in, he had a role in Grease, in the movie Grease back in the 70s. Oh, I can't think of his name right now. But my mom used to talk about him all the time, and it drove me crazy. I'm like, I'm trying to watch the show. I don't care who the actor's name is or, what you think about him. I'm always dropping little nuggets now about my family. I don't. You want to know what my cat's favorite pair of socks are? Let me share that with you. It's actually my son's cat. I think Sealy's underrated. That's a comment. From Larry. Yeah, he might be. Yeah, let's just do comment. I'll just play around a little bit here. Yeah, sometimes you'll hear my son's cat meowing. He's my cat too. I'm a dog guy. I lost my dog a year ago. I had 2. And the previous one was in 2019, and then a year ago, last April. In fact, we're coming up on the anniversary date when I lost Olive, and I haven't gotten another dog. You can't replace your loved pets. You don't replace them. You just move on and build a new relationship with the pet. So the cats, I call him Cat Dog. He's kind of he's the go-to for pet right now for me, and will continue to be. But I'm going to get another dog at some point. Am I boring you to death? I'm boring myself to death. Do I have a pair of Daisy Dukes? That's interesting that you asked that. I have some that got left behind here and there. I got stories that I won't share, but yeah, some that got left behind. So I guess they're mine now. I haven't tried them on. I think that would be, that would be an exercise in futility. They're not big, just big enough for the fair sex. What else we got? I'm almost 40 minutes in, and I've really kind of wrapped everything up. I like the comments. Trying to have a little fun with it today. I don't mean to always come across as just stiff and meandering, trying to bring info, but that does happen. Let's get to it. Let's get back to work. Let's see what else I can find out. Maybe I'll get lucky and get one of these players on the phone today and get some more answers. But we're on commitment watch. We're on visit watch. We're on, folks hopefully feeling good about Calipari and what the end results will be, and the understanding that there's not a whole lot to add here. They're important pieces, but it's not a whole lot. But until next something breaks, or the next time I decide to come on just to give updates, it's not necessarily breaking, maybe new intel. I will do that and let you know when. Thank you for being here. Take care. We'll see you soon.